All right. So we're going to talk about the basic elements of poetry. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So first thing I wanted to figure out was what poetry is to you guys. Okay. Figure out what poetry means to you. Again, you listen to poetry every day. Every time you turn on Lil Baby or Lil Gunna or NBA Youngboy or all of those trash rappers that you listen to. First of all, I kind of like you.
Huh?
Did you just say Tupac and Biggie were trash?
No.
Oh, okay.
I said NBA Youngboy's trash.
Okay, there you go. See.
Sorry,
I'm sorry, but I hate mumble rappers. When you can't hear what you're saying, stop.
That's the whole song. That's the whole song.
You can't hear it?
You mentioned Gucci Gang. So that's all said Gucci Gang. What's up?
It's repeating the same thing over.
Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang. Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang.
Now that's the song.
That expresses pure
Spend 10 raps on a new chain. Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang, Gucci Gang. Come on, man. Really?
Spend 10 racks on new chains.
Like, that's just ridiculous, right? But obviously poetry in and of itself, poetry in and of itself is way beyond that. All right? So let's talk about it. All right, we're gonna talk first about the basic elements of poetry, okay? You've already kind of asked the question, you don't necessarily have to write this down. You can if you don't know it. What is poetry? Poetry is not prose, okay? There is a difference. If you don't know the difference, you should definitely write this down. Poetry is not prose. Prose, ordinary language that you write, that you speak, right, every day. Poetry, on the other hand, is something a little bit different, okay? Poetry is a form of literary expression, okay, that captures intense experiences or creative perceptions of the world in musical language. So, even though poetry can be spoken, poetry in and of itself is not speaking because it is designed to do something different, okay? It's designed to express something different. You express yourself in regular conversation, but you're not meaning necessarily to express yourself, as in, I want to get this feeling out. You're saying something, and I can get that feeling through what you're saying. Does that make sense? Whereas poetry, I'm specifically trying to express something. As Ms. Thorne said, only time I ever hear poetry is when somebody's heart gets broken, right? They're expressing heartbreak. If you think about any of the songs and music that you listen to, those guys are expressing something.
Gucci.
You know, Percocets, Molly Percocets, right?
I listen to N.
Huh?
I listen to NF. That's better.
I don't know what
That.
Love it.
You don't know NF?
NF?
Who's that?
Notification.
Yeah, seriously, what is that?
It's therapist.
Okay, I learned something new.
I mean, he is a Christian, but he's like not a Christian.
Okay, all right. So, if you look at it from that standpoint, if prose is talking, poetry is singing, okay? Again, it's not necessarily something you have to write down, but if you don't really understand the difference between prose, poetry, there it is, okay? Prose is what you find in any book that you read. Poetry, you gotta go specific places for that, okay? Any questions on the basics of what poetry is? All right. Poems are set up differently, okay? Differently from differently from any other literature that you read, right? And again, we're gonna get into that here in a little while. All right, so what makes poetry poetry, right? What separates it? All right, here's some distinguishing characteristics. Now, in prose, you have a narrator. You have someone telling you the story, okay? Whereas in poetry, you have what's known as a speaker, not to be confused with the narrator, okay? A speaker talks directly to you, the reader. A narrator is just some way off person that that is just telling you what's happening. Speaker has a voice and they're talking directly to you, the reader, okay? Now the speaker can be fictional, speaking can be an animal, it can even be an inanimate object. Take example, this poem right here. But believe me, son, I want to be what I used to be when I was like you. From Once Upon a Time by Gabriel Okara, okay? The speaker, before I ask, who does it sound like the speaker is?
Dad.
It's dad, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that that's the narrator. That's just who's speaking in the poem, okay? Any questions on speaker versus a narrator? That's something that you really need to understand and be able to distinguish, because when we start doing analysis and we start talking about poems and breaking them down, point of view is going to be very important. All right, whether it's first or third person, who the speaker is, what they're trying to say, and how that affects the meaning of the poem, okay? Different formats. All right, now we know what, I don't want to assume that you guys don't know anything, so as we go through this, if there's something that you're confused about, raise your hand, all right? Now, we know in poetry, you have lines, right? Lines become what? Stanzas, right? So a line in and of itself is a word or row of words that may not form a complete sentence. And this is where poetry really starts to diverge from prose, because a lot of the rules that apply in prose do not apply in poetry. Poetry is one of the few forms of literature, if not the only form, where you can pretty much do whatever you want, especially if you're talking about free verse. Does that make sense? The rules of grammar do not apply. The rules of mechanics in terms of what you're writing and how you're writing it do not apply. You can have a whole poem of dependent clauses if you want to. Does that make sense? Try to write an essay with just dependent clauses and see what happens. Right? A stanza is a group of lines that form the unit. We already talked about that, okay? Typically, they're separated by 1 or 2 spaces. So here, this one line could be a stanza, depending on how you're writing your poem. But notice the separation between that and the next stanza, which is only 2 lines. And we'll talk about that here in a little while also, okay? So we're good on lines and stanzas, right? All right. Now, a figure of speech, okay, is a word or expression that is not to be taken literally, okay? It's not to be taken literally. This is where we get into things, you know them as figurative language, okay? For example, a simile is a figure of speech. Can anybody give me some other examples of figures of speech or figurative language?
Metaphor.
What's a metaphor?
Comparing 2 things without using one.
Comparison to unrelated things, an implied comparison of unrelated things that does not use like or as, okay? Again, we're going to get into that. We obviously know what a simile is. All right. Did you guys read this poem last year in middle school?
I would.
I have
No.
Harlem by Langston Hughes? Did y'all read A Dream Deferred?
No reason what? What did you say?
Did y'all read A Dream Deferred?
I don't think you read one.
Don't worry, you will this year.
We read the entire-
Right. We already talked about what a metaphor is. Okay. The moon is, and it's as long as it doesn't use like or as, the moon is, you are. Those are some telltale signs that you're dealing with a metaphor. All right. Personification, you know what that is, right?
Yeah.
Now these terms, you don't necessarily have to write them down if you're familiar with them, but if you're not, then by all means, go ahead and take notes. All right. Personification gives attributes that are human attributes to an animal, object, or idea. Okay? A spider sewed at night. Now, obviously, a spider cannot sew. That is something that people do. Okay? What do you think the spider is sewing?
A
A
web.
web.
Okay, just make sure we.
He's gonna help Wilbur.
Oh.
You mean she's gonna
Who's
help
that?
Wilbur?
Did you-
I thought it was a
Did you
girl.
just- Did you just make a Charlotte Webb's reference?
Yes.
Who is that?
I watched that movie like
Charlotte-
5,000 times.
Yeah.
But it's still.
I've
Raise-
actually never.
Raise your hand if you've
watched
read Charlotte's Web.
I've read it.
that.
I've seen it.
Already?
I'm sorry, raise your hand if you've seen the movie.
I've seen
I've done both.
Then we have hyperbole.
So,
And again, my expectation is not that you write all this stuff down, especially if you already know it, all right? Hyperbole, all right? You want to emphasize something with great exaggeration. You guys, obviously, you haven't asked me this question a million times, but used for dramatic effect. Imagery is going to be very important as we go through, especially when it comes to analysis. Descriptive language that applies to the senses. So, as writers, what I want you to think about, or I want you to consider, is how you touch the senses of your reader. Some of the reason Biggie is one of the greatest lyricists of all time. One of the greatest, even the, what'd you say?
Tupac's better.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm on camera.
Who we compare him to though? If
Okay.
it's just Biggie by himself,
Okay, hold on, because I'm on camera, so I'm gonna be careful what I say here. I specifically said the reason Notorious B.I.G. is one of the greatest lyricists / rappers of all time. Because I can name, hold on, I can name 5 rappers that are lyrically better than Biggie.
I can name 4. Stop.
Right? Listen, I can name 5 rappers that are lyrically better than Biggie. But what made Biggie so great was his ability to tell stories, was his ability to bring you into what he was saying through the use of imagery. If you go back and listen to his music, there's very few songs where you cannot see, hear, or feel in some way, shape, or form what he is saying. Music in and of itself is about connection.
Did he die?
Yes, he did.
Me neither.
Selena.
As Mr. Johnson probably is.
Whitney.
Hold on a second, there was a glitch in my matrix. I gotta reset.
You really just said Biggie Johnson.
You really just said you don't know who B.I.G. is?
Yeah.
I know.
All right, we're gonna move forward because I'm on camera and I don't want parents coming at me. All right, but the ability, again, to appeal to more than one sense, to multiple senses of your readers, or if you're a musician, your listeners, is what really makes and what separates good from great. Anybody can play a tune, but when you make me feel what you're playing or make me feel what you're writing, that's a whole different level. Yes,
You said anybody can play it.
yes.
No.
No,
I
listen,
can't.
okay, listen. We're not gonna go down this rabbit hole. I can pick up an instrument that I've never played before and just start playing. Doesn't mean it's a good tune, doesn't mean it's pleasing to the ear, but I could, in theory, sit down on the piano, press keys, and play a tune. Does that make sense? Obviously, you're not gonna feel that. Go ahead. Go ahead. Obviously, you're not gonna feel that, but when you sit down and you listen to For Elise, you guys got to start reading. All right, move forward. All right, so let's talk about sound devices. All right, what do we mean by sound devices, ladies and gentlemen? Here's an example of what in and of itself is a sound device.
It's like,
A device that makes sound.
No,
Don't even.
say again, Chris.
I was just about to say what's a little more, but it's like how they all have like the same sound for being a word.
Not quite, but you're on the way. Go ahead.
When they say like a word that you need to understand, or like a main using forward, like alliteration where they repeat the word so you understand that's like the main part of
Okay,
the poem.
go ahead.
Like it changes the way it sounds or is perceived.
Right. Okay, so you're kind of all in the same ballpark, right? But a sound device in and of itself is simply a tool that the writer uses to emphasize using the words and how they sound a specific thing, trying to deliver a specific message by having a word sound a certain way, whether that's with alliteration, for example. Now, I know some of you guys, well, I know if you don't know who Biggie is, you're definitely not going to know who this is, or maybe you won't. Eminem,
Oh,
Yeah.
but you don't know who
Fucking job.
Biggie is?
Yeah, I don't know.
You know Dr.
Yeah, I don't know.
Dr.
But if you listen to Eminem,
No, Snoop Dogg is?
alliteration,
Too short?
he is the master of alliteration. Right. But in all seriousness, listen to any Eminem song,
Wow.
and you will hear alliteration at its finest, okay? Then you have assonance. You may want to write this one down, ladies and gentlemen. Assonance is the repetition of vowel sounds within the line of poetry, right? Who's a Lil Wayne fan?
Oh, what?
Lil Wayne.
Oh, you said Lil Wayne.
The only way
Yeah.
I know is
No, Lil Wayne. Now, I'm a firm believer that really good hip hop is memorable.
Is that for-
This thing called quotables. If you could come back to me after a song is played, let's say days, months, even years, and quote something from that song, that's how you know it's good. All right. I'm not a Lil Wayne fan because I don't think he's that lyrical. However, I give credit where credit is due, right? So I'm going to write this on the board. And he had a song called 6 Foot, 7 Foot, right?
Lasagna.
No.
Lasagna is just.
I'm not going to repeat the whole thing.
We're behind you.
So the line that he had in the song that I still to this day give him credit as one of the greatest hip hop quotes was, I'm just gonna kind of blah, 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 blah right behind you. Blah, 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 like lasagna.
Like lasagna.
I
Who
feel
did
like
that?
blah, blah, blah.
Lil Wayne, right? So, but it is a beautiful example of assonance, right? Because assonance is what? The repetition of vowel sounds within a line of poetry, okay? So, what vowel sound is being repeated here?
Like
Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Is it? What's the vowel sound being repeated here?
Behind you.
Oh, right? It's the Never mind that the line was real G's moving silence like lasagna. Did I just go over your head with that one?
No, well, I didn't want that. Like,
Real G's moving silence like lasagna.
Oh, he said G's. I thought he said cheese.
You said G's?
I was lasagna is silent. What?
The G in silent.
Oh, that was cold.
Exactly.
What's your favorite kind of cheese?
I don't know what she said. Whoa. Stay on track. You're not about to do.
Bro, cheddar.
But here is the hidden genius, and I'm not saying he didn't do it on purpose. Here's the hidden genius in this line. All right, look at the word assonance. Okay, this line behind what? Yeah, right? Say this word out loud.
Lasagna.
Lasagna.
You don't say the G, man. It's silent.
Lasagna.
English.
Say it again.
Yo, lasagna.
You dropped something.
Lasagna, yeah.
No, he's saying when you say lasagna,
You
it
say
sounds like
yeah.
you
Pretty
have
bad
love,
song
but it's
if
no
it's
Y
lasagna.
in it.
No.
It sounds-
You're not allowed to
The end of lasagna behind ya.
Stands up Canadian.
Yes.
Do y'all see it?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm not saying he didn't do it on purpose. I'm saying that's one of the best hip hop lines I've ever heard.
You said
Lasagna.
You have not heard it.
No, I haven't. I don't think he's that little. We're not
He's
going
an
down this rabbit hole.
English teacher.
I really want to. Especially since you don't even know who it is.
We're still
We'll
on
get-
that.
I'm still on that.
We'll get there. We'll get there. I promise you, we'll have plenty of time for that. All right. Now, onomatopoeia, we already know what that is, right?
See.
This.
right?
This.
Okay, so
Boom.
use of the word or phrase
Onomatopoeia.
that imitates or suggests the word that it describes, okay? Nothing overly complicated. Now here's some examples of sound device. Before I pull it up there, so maybe somebody can tell me what's being used. In the steamer is the trout, seasoned with slivers of ginger.
Who speaks with that?
What sound device is being used?
Second one.
What's the second one?
Second one, that was on the other side.
You don't know what it is by looking at it? You don't know the term? It's imagery.
It says sound device.
I didn't say Steve.
I thought imagery was under the figure of speech.
It is. That's why I asked for sound device.
Yeah, the second one.
What's the second one? Assonance?
Why? Yes, that one. I think,
Who disagrees?
To be honest,
I don't even know what I'm disagreeing on. Because it's not repeating a word and it's not making a sound.
What sound device is, what sound device?
I don't know. I just know it's not assonance.
Sliver.
How is it? Because I
Read-
literally.
Somebody read it out loud.
In the steamer is the trout seasoned with slivers of ginger.
Okay, it can't be the first one because that one is not repeating any words at all.
Is that what alliteration is?
It was repetition of something.
The repetition of what?
the sound, how it sounds.
Consonant.
Like in the
There's no
beginning of
word.
the sound.
Consonant beginning sounds, right?
Yeah. Dreamer,
Big
season,
smart.
sliver.
You gotta overrun the natural.
Ginger, sliver. Dreamer, season.
What are you reading?
I'm just reading it back.
What about this one?
Assonance.
Why?
Rise and eyes.
Rise, eyes, bright. You could probably slide that in there if you want to. Let's go back to the first one. Why couldn't it be alliteration?
So it's alliteration. That's why I'm trying to
Really?
Why couldn't it be?
Why couldn't it be? Because you said assonance.
What's alliteration again?
The
Bruh.
repetition of a word, or
No.
like not a word, but like a
Repetition.
sound.
Consonant sounds at the beginning of the word.
Steamer.
Oh, it can be because
Bro, that's at the end.
Beginning.
Bro, you're anti-smart.
Steamer.
Steamers make a sound. They go.
Let's go back. Make sure we understand. All right. Is there a case to be made for alliteration?
There what?
Is there a case to be made for alliteration?
Yeah. Alliteration, yes, because that is what's like
Is there a case to be made for assonance?
no.
trout, stone.
It
It could be like slivery.
There's steamer, there's slippers, there's ginger.
Yeah,
There's a lot of
yeah.
There's a lot of S too, and there's a lot of Now, we just turned what's on the board, but what would that be?
Alliteration.
The ER at the end, the consonant sound at the end.
No, because assonance is the vowel sound.
So what would be the consonant sound?
And it's not alliteration.
Starts with a C?
It starts with a
Constant.
C.
Yeah.
Bro,
You didn't teach us no C. You taught us an A and an O.
Oh.
What is consonants?
Sounds
Have you ever heard
Constant
that term
vowel.
before? Jalen, have you heard that
every
term?
letter that's not a vowel.
Have you heard the term consonants before?
I heard it.
Every
isn't
letter
like,
that's not a vowel.
isn't like constant
No.
Here's what I need you to do.
Because the vowels are A, E, I, or U.
Pull out the cheat sheet I gave you.
What's teach you? Which one?
The one with the picture of language.
Oh my god. This one?
Which one?
Yes.
No way I have it.
Whoa, that's crazy, bro.
What is consonant?
Conjunction.
What is consonant?
It's the repetition of constant sounds.
Where?
Oh,
The
Final.
So
that was
end.
compound words.
Yeah.
So you were saying the answer all the time.
Yeah.
He was.
Yeah, he said constant a lot.
Cliche.
So the answer
Bro,
was.
shut up. You can't just say everything
That's why I say it wasn't on the board, right? Because it had assonance.
I
and it had
never heard you say it was on.
Me either.
But you know, I got it on film though. It's okay.
Weird flex, but okay.
All right, rhyming, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh,
Okay.
that's so.
Rhyme, not to be confused with rhythm. Rhymes, not to be confused with rhythm. The repetition of the same stretched vowel sound in 2 or more words, okay? So think cat, sat, hat, bat, mat,
Cat in the Hat.
Rat.
right? The same stressed vowel sound, okay? That's very key. Doesn't necessarily have to be in the beginning or the middle of words, as long as it's the same stretched vowel sound. And again, this is another thing that makes Eminem such a genius. Internal rhyme, because typically you guys used to rhyme being where? Words rhyming at the
And
end. You have what's called internal rhyme, which occurs within the line. So not necessarily, it could be at the beginning, but most times it's somewhere within the line of poetry. Then of course, end rhyme is what you guys are accustomed to. Does anybody know how to do a rhyme scheme?
Is it like when you say every word in rhymes with the other, either the above or below the section?
Right. So you assign letters to it. Let's take a look.
oh, A B C A B C A B C. I know what you're talking about now.
It's more.
A B B B. I mean A A B B
C.
C C
So what would this first line be?
A A
What the second one be?
A
Bro, you
B,
know
B. Oh.
What's the second? What's the third one?
B.
Fourth?
B
C.
C C C C.
All right, let's see what we got. All right. Raise your hand if that doesn't make sense. Okay, so the rhyme scheme is based on the ending, right? So the reason that these are assigned the letter A is because you have the word rule and mule. Those two rhyme together. Those two, does that make sense? But when you go to the next line, it's got a different what? End rhyme. So it gets a different letter designation. Does that make sense? So if you go to the fourth line, does that rhyme with that? So that gets the same letter designation. But then as you move down, what happens? The end rhyme, what? It's different. Now, what if they said instead of marvelous me, it said marvelous bat? What would the letter designation be? It would be B. Make sense? But because it's completely different from previous, it gets a whole nother letter designation. And that's how you break down the rhyme scheme. Any questions on that? Let's try it again.
A.
A, B,
Hey, hold on.
A, B,
A, B, C.
You said A,
A, B,
B,
A,
A,
sun, one, season breezes, B,
B, wave,
C.
rock,
D.
knock,
D.
thread,
E,
bed,
E.
grave,
C.
see?
Yes.
No.
Gray rhymes with wave.
Oh, I thought we were.
Bro, we were right.
Good job. See, rhyme scheme's easy. Don't. Nah, I'm not gonna do that to y'all.
What?
No, you can do it for a verse.
Do what?
Don't worry, we'll get
Well,
there.
he's gonna make us rap.
A C C C was in
Alright.
C.
How to do that in eighth grade?
So now,
I can't rap.
as I said, ladies and gentlemen, rhythm is not the same as rhyme, and rhyme is not the same as rhythm, okay? Rhythm is a pattern of sound created by the arrangement of stressed and unstressed syllables, okay? Rhythm can be regular or irregular. Rhyme helps create rhythm, okay? Rhyme helps create rhythm. Do you guys remember meter and iambic pentameter and all that other good stuff?
No.
Really?
What?
Those are big words, I can't think of them.
What did y'all do with 8th
Nothing.
Not this.
Yeah, like,
So,
it cut out early, so that was probably something we meant to learn later, I don't know.
I learned
Maybe.
problems in like 7th.
Either we forgot it
And I
or it
failed.
cut out, or school cut out before we did learn.
All right, well, meter, ladies and gentlemen, is a regular pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables, which sets the overall rhythm of a certain poem. Now, the signs that you need to worry about when it comes to stress and unstressed, okay? When you are stressing a particular syllable, you will use that symbol. If you don't know this, write it down. Unstressed, you will use that symbol. Now, this is very important because the stressing of some syllables over others, again, can affect meaning, especially when you're talking about the speaker, what they're saying and what they're trying to say. Yes, Keith?
I don't know if it's that.
Typically, when you're doing analysis, you will know where certain things are stressed. Like you'll have those symbols. I'm all over the place right now. You will have those symbols at the top to let you know what's stressed and what's not. Now, obviously, if you go online right now and say, okay, I want to look at this poem, that poem probably won't have those symbols, but when we're getting into analysis, those symbols will be available so you can see what's stressed versus what isn't, and make a determination of what's trying to be said, okay? Now, the best way to understand this, ladies and gentlemen, okay?
No, my phone is off.
All right. So do you understand what a foot is?
Well, like this place?
Come
Our
on now,
foot,
12
like how
inches.
long?
we're not that sensitive.
12 inches.
Oh, it's the number of them.
A measurement of what?
The number of syllables.
Inches.
The number of syllables. All right,
So how do you measure the number? Oh, like just like the number of syllables is the measure.
right. The number of syllables in a given line of poetry. Okay. The number of syllables in a given
Like
line.
on a monopoly or six.
And then the number of feet determines the meter. Okay. Make sense? Okay, we're gonna get into it here in a second. So don't worry about it. I got you.
Did you?
All right, you might want to write this down, ladies and gentlemen. This is the most common type of meter. It's called iambic pentameter, okay? Iamb, foot consisting of an initial unstressed syllable followed by a stressed one. For example, the word return, displace, to love, my heart. Now, if you say the word return, what's the stressed versus unstressed part of that word? First of all, how many syllables in the word return?
2.
2 syllables, right? So what would be stressed versus unstressed? If I wrote the word return, what's stressed?
Read.
No.
Read.
Read.
What's the stress part?
Read.
That's where you put the most emphasis in the word. Just say the word, return. Say it.
Turn.
Where did you put the most stress in the word?
Turn.
You put the most stress in turn?
Yeah.
So it would look something like that? Is that what you're saying?
Or it can be slash and right.
Oh, so you're saying it could be that?
And it's just like depend on how the first book. It just depends on the person's thought.
Yeah.
So it's not often the same for everybody.
I could buy that argument. Now, if you look at a dictionary, it's going to tell you specifically this is what part of the word is stressed.
Oh, that's what those symbols are.
Wow.
No.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you just say that's what the symbols are? Returns?
I've never seen those symbols. I don't think I looked that hard in the dictionary. I actually looked for open
I thought they were
dictionary.
like under the word it has those
I just look for
symbols
backwards.
or next to it or whatever.
There's dictionaries back there. Look,
Yeah, hold it.
see if they're in there.
I just thought those were random lines they put in there.
So why would they put random lines in the dictionary?
Because they're people.
Just look up any word.
Look up tonight.
Did you say knight?
Yes, I said
All right,
It doesn't have them.
are you sure?
Yeah.
Look at the word, right?
Yeah.
Look up any word.
Okay.
Right next to it, there should be in parentheses the pronunciation of that word,
Uh-huh.
right?
Ow. I like.
The pronunciation should tell you what part of the word is stressed versus what part isn't. If I'm not mistaken, the stress part is the part that's in bold black, right? You see it?
Yeah. Huh?
I'm gonna make you come back here.
You made Mr. Johnson walk.
Right. What?
I'm gonna just put some random words.
No. Okay. Did you see it in the dictionary?
You're very blonde.
All right. A pentameter is a line of verse containing 5 metrical feet. And we know what a foot is, right?
1 inch.
Hmm?
1 inch.
No. A foot in iambic pentameter. A foot in iambic pentameter is initial unstressed followed by stressed. So they're telling you in the word return, read is the unstressed part. Is the unstressed part, right? So in the word return, the stress part is turn. In the word displace, the stress part is place. Displace.
So love has 2 syllables?
No, to love.
Where are you getting that?
Oh, true. I did not see the word to.
Just like my heart.
You keep saying like, hey,
Can anybody say the word my heart
My
my
heart.
heart.
My heart.
without putting stress on heart?
My heart.
Stress my versus heart.
Mine heart.
Mine heart.
Yeah, so what just happened there?
You're saying it's yours. It's your heart.
But what I'm saying is, what did you just do?
It's your
You
heart. saying
yell.
the word
You just
mine.
said the word.
A little stressed about it.
You stressed something, you stressed my versus heart, right?
My
That
heart.
goes back to what Kirsten was saying about how you, depending on how you say it. Does that make sense?
Imagine eating food, but
Now, why is this significant? Okay, this is what you need to know, especially when we get into analysis next week. Why is this significant? You don't necessarily have to write it down, although I do recommend it, okay? It's closest to your everyday speech. The everyday conversations that you have with people, iambic pentameter. In addition, it mimics the sound of a heartbeat, sound common to all human beings, so it's easy to keep up with. Finally, I'm gonna be honest with you, ladies and gentlemen, we're not gonna touch William Shakespeare too much. I know I'm on camera and I'm probably gonna get in trouble for saying this, but
You have to.
William Shakespeare is boring, right? And I'm not saying you can't learn poetry from studying William Shakespeare. What I'm saying is he's not the only poet to ever live, nor is Edgar Allan Poe or Langston Hughes or the same 3 to 5 poets that you guys have studied since you've been in school.
I didn't
I
know
grew
about
up with Poe.
Oh no, Edgar Allan Poe is that dude.
Why does everybody say William Shakespeare?
Huh?
There's like so many other ones.
Exactly.
What is English?
So we're gonna talk about some other poets.
Did you wait? What did you just say?
William.
Romeo and Juliet.
to be or not.
He's just having a bad day.
Sorry.
He's just having a bad day.
Okay, what do
Brianna knows a lot. She knows what she knows. All right, this will be the last one, and we're gonna stop here until tomorrow. All right. So here are some examples of iambic pentameter. Okay. And death is better, as the millions know, than dandruff, night starvation, or VO.
I would much rather die than have hair flips.
All right, we're gonna stop right there, ladies and gentlemen.